Hey guys, want to do a quick review of our math, show what you know that we did today. So we're going to set this up in a cool way. I'm going to read the question and then I'm going to tell you to pause the video. So when I say pause, you pause and I want you to think about what your answer is. And then when you think you know the answer, you hit play and I'm going to explain it to you. All right, so this is a way to check yourself. Remember, our next monthly test isn't for a couple weeks, but this is the first half of what we have to know, okay? And it's reading, writing, comparing decimals. So let's take a look at number one. Which phrase is the correct wording for this decimal? So there it is. Your choices are 14,570, 14 and 507 thousandths, 14 and 57 hundredths, and 14 and 500 thousandths. So pause me right now and get your answer. Okay, so remember, we've talked about this in class. The decimal point means and, right? You have to hear the word and. So A is 14,570. That doesn't even make sense, does it? And it doesn't say the word and, so you know A is not the answer. 14 and 507 thousandths. This is 507. And remember, this last word that you're going to hear is always this place. And remember, we have our tens, tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. So B would be your answer. Now let's look. 14 and 57 hundredths. That would be 14 and 57 hundredths, because you would have to have your last number be in the hundredths place. So C does not work. And 14,500, it doesn't even have an and in it. So if you don't see the word and, you automatically know that's not the answer. All right, let's move on to number two. Which decimal represents this decimal in standard form? So you have to read the words, and then find it. So pause me right now and get your answer. Okay, so when we look at this, I've been telling you guys all the time to do your ones, tens, hundreds, then do your decimal, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. And then you can just fill it in, right? And remember, everything that comes before the and goes on this side, and everything after the and goes on this side. So 3 is just in the ones place of 3, right? Then your decimal comes straight down. 26 thousandths. Here's the tricky part. You got to make sure you put the 6 in the thousandths, right? And then because it says 26, it would look like this. The numbers have got to stay together. That's the tricky part, because when you hear 26 thousandths, you think that this 2 should be over here, but the number has got to stay together, right? That's the trickiest part for you guys to think about, is when it says 26 thousandths, the 6 has to be in the thousandths, and then the 26 has to stay together. So the tricky part is you would think that this 2 would be in the tenths place, but it's not. It goes over a little bit. So your answer for number 2 would be C. All right, let's look at number 3. Which decimal has a 4 in the hundredths place? Pause me now and get your answer. Okay, same thing for this one. I always just do this. You don't have to if you know this, but I always go ones, tens, hundreds, decimal, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. It just helps me think about it. So I need to get a 4 in the hundredths place, which is right here, right? Hundredths. So I need a 4 right here. So I know there's going to be the decimal. Then I know there could be a number here, but there's got to be a 4, 2 numbers after the decimal, right? So let's take a look. Decimal, tenths, hundredths. This has a 0 in the hundredths. That can't be the answer. Decimal, tenths, hundredths. That has an 8 in the hundredths place. Can't be the answer. Decimal, tenths, hundredths, has a 3 in the hundredths. Can't be the answer. This actually threw me off the first time I looked at this, because I went, wow, there is no answer. But they tricked me because they moved the decimal over. The decimal's over here. Tenths, hundredths. There's the hundredths place. There's your 4. Your answer is D. All right. Let's go on to number 4. Number 4 says, which decimal is shown by point A on the number line? Pause me right now and figure it out. Okay, if you have your answer, now you're going to look for your explanation. So we know that our answer has to be between 1 and 2, right? It has to be some number between 1 and 2. Well, this one, 14, is not between 1 and 2. So remember, part of our strategy is to eliminate choices that don't make sense, right? Not to get confused. So we still have now 0.4 doesn't have a whole number that's at least a 1, so that would be out here somewhere. So that's too small. So see, now we're immediately down to 2 choices, right? Now remember, if you do your decimal, tenths, hundredths, thousandths again, and I'll put my ones in here since we have it. This is 1.4, and this one would be 1.04 in the hundredths. So we know that tenths means 10, right? And hundredths means 100. Well, how many spaces are in here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that is your clue to know that you're in the tenths place. And of course, you're 1, 2, 3, 4 over. So you would get the answer of A, looking at that chart. All right, let's go on to number 5 for today's work. It says, which set of decimals below is correctly compared, greater than or less than? So pause me now and figure it out. Okay, so this one, there's really no massive trick here, right? You've just got to start breaking these down. You got to look at each one. Now you can do the chart out here and write them so you can see it clearer, or you can just look at it the way I look at it. I start with the biggest number. So the whole numbers are both 3s. So we can't figure that out, right? Then we have our and with the decimal. Then we go to the tenths place. They're both 5s. That's not going to help us, right? Then in the hundredths place, we have a 6 and a 4. So this sign is saying that this 6 is less than this 4. That's not correct. We have our 45 and our 45. They're equal. We have our 6/10 and our 6/10. They're equal. Then I have a 700ths and a 300ths. This is saying that the 7 in the hundredths is bigger than the 3 because we already did our whole number in our tenths, right? So I'm pretty sure that's the answer. Now, I beg you guys, just because you think that's right, go through and prove the other one's wrong because that's how you can be sure that you're right. We have no whole numbers, so these are equal. 0.4 is the same. 0.4 is the same in the tenths. This one has a 5 in the hundredths. This one's blank. You have to remember when it's blank, that doesn't really mean it's blank. It means it's a 0, right? So this right here is saying this is the same, 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 same. This is saying that 5 is less than 0. That doesn't make sense, right? So you got to cross that one out. Here we have the ones are the same. The tenths are the same. The hundredths are different. This is saying that 7 is bigger than 9, essentially, which is not true. So please go through and make sure you check out the rest of them. Number 6 says, what is the number in standard form? Remember, standard form is putting it together in a whole number / decimal form. So they broke it all out into a big, huge problem for us. So pause me for a second and figure this one out. Okay, when you see this one, the chart helps me totally. Now you could just go multiply this out and add it all together, but I don't. To me, my chart helps me. I do decimal, ones, tens, hundreds. Then I do tenths, hundredths, thousandths. And now I know I'm dealing with 100, and that's a whole number, so I'm in this column. So 100 times 4 is 4. Now I'm dealing with a 1. That goes to these ones. There are no tenths, so that's a 0. 5 times 1 is 5. Now I start going by the fractions. You need to know right when you see these fractions, that's when you get to the right side of the decimal, right? Less than 1. So the decimal comes down. Now, if I was taking a real test, this is when I'd start to eliminate answers that don't make sense because look, 450 and 450 don't make sense. So now we're down to 2 choices. But see, they're trying to trick you because if you just take this 5 times 1 and just drop it down into the next category, you'd put it right here, and then the answer would look like 450, right? So you have to pay attention to this number or you're going to get messed up. So Now, tenths, 1/10, that's this category right here, right? So you just got to know your 9 just comes down. Plus, now we're in the thousandths. That's this category right here. So the 4 goes here. There is no hundredths, right? So that just fills in as a 0. And then if you take a look, we have that as an answer. It would be D. Now, remember, if you don't pay attention and you put this, if you just put in a placeholder here and see this one, they try to trick you because if you put the 0, 9, and 4 and you get mixed up in your place values, you'd think C would be the answer. All right, number 7 says, which decimal below is the largest? We need to find the one that's the largest, the biggest. Pause me right now and figure it out. Okay, so for number 7, you can do this a lot of different ways. I always just go to my chart. I mean, it's up to you. Ones, tens, hundreds, decimal, tenths, hundredths, thousands. And now I'm just going to write out each one to see which one's the biggest. So I'm going to carry this one straight across. 64, 60 in the tens and 4 in the ones. And is this decimal? 5 hundredths. So my 5 has got to go in the hundredths column. So that would make this 0, 0. So now let's go to the next one. 6 times 10 is 60. I don't, now it goes into the fraction. So now I know I'm going on to this side of the decimal, right? So there is nothing here. So I already know that A is bigger, right? I mean, I can keep going on, but I don't really have to because I already know this is going to come out to 60. So I know B cannot be bigger than A. So I can eliminate it immediately. The next one, 6 times 10 is 6 tens. 4 times 1 is 4. So now I got a thing going on here, right? Because 64 and 64. So now let's pay attention. Plus my and, because now I'm going into a fraction. The tenths gets a 5. And the hundredths place gets an 8. So now when I'm looking at this, now 64.5 is bigger than 64.0. So now I can eliminate A. This is just a lot of steps you have to learn, right? And now they've already written this one out for me, so I'll just move it over. 64.058. These match up. So I'm really just comparing this and this. And I need the largest one. That's the largest. So C would be my answer. All right, let's go to number 8. This is where we got a little confused earlier, and this is kind of hard for me to explain too. So take a second and think about number 8. Pause me. Okay, so it wants us to figure out the smallest number. So remember, when we're doing division or multiplication, I'm going to show you how these come out to the same thing, right? Because 10 to the third power is just a 10 with 3 zeros at the end, right? It would just, or the 1 with 3 zeros. We know the power, that's how many zeros you add. So this would be 2.8 divided by 1,000, right? Now, we've already told you guys a bunch of times that when you do this, it's just moving the decimal point the amount of zeros, right? So this would go 1, 2, 3, and your answer here would be 0.028. So that's pretty small. Now, you're moving the decimal the same way when you divide. So this would be 2.8, but you're only moving 2 zeros, 1, 2. So as you can see, this number's still smaller, right? Because remember, this has got a 2 in the hundredths place. This has got a 0. So this number's still smaller. Now, here's the thing. When you multiply, it's the same thing, right? This was the trick question. Multiplying and dividing in this scenario, you get the same answer because watch. 2.8 times 1/2. Remember, you're multiplying by a fraction, so the number's going to get smaller. So you've got to put this over 1 to turn it into a fraction. And then all you get is 2.8 tenths, right? I don't know if I said that right. But that just turns into 10 divided by 2.8, which is basically a division problem, right? Because this 10 goes into the 2.8. And it's the same thing here that you would be doing with the 100. So all of these, and we're going to talk more about this next week. This one if it's confusing for you, it's okay, because it's even confusing for me to talk about. But you're just moving the decimal point, the amount of zeros, and you just have to understand that basically the division problem, you use the reciprocal to figure it out, turns into a multiplication problem. And remember, when you multiply a fraction by a whole number, it's going to get smaller, right? That was our rule from last time. So the one that makes you move 3 zeros is the one that's going to move the farthest, and we'll talk more about that. That one, you have to remember that rule, that when you multiply by the fractions, it gets smaller. And dividing 1/100th is multiplying 1/100th is the same as dividing by 100. It's the same thing. And it doesn't seem like it would be the same thing in your head. So that's why sometimes you have to work it out to get it. But that one's tricky. We're going to go more into that next week. Number 9 says, which decimals are ordered from least to greatest? Pause me and think about that one. Okay, so number 9, you've got it. Listen, you just have to look at each one for this, right? And look at and cross out the ones that don't go from smallest to biggest. So 67, 67, 67, we're good. Then it's got 0.9, and then it goes down to 0.0. So you can stop right there. It doesn't work, right? That doesn't work. Now let's look at B. B has 3. This is supposed to be a decimal. That's a typo. 3 and 3. That works. Then it goes to the tenths. 4, 4, 5. That's still least to greatest, right? Then it goes to the hundredths. 7, 8. And then this one is already bigger because it's 0.5, right? So we don't have to go that far anymore. So B is definitely goes from smaller to bigger, right? Now, prove the other ones wrong. Don't just stop, because maybe I messed up. Maybe I made a mistake. This goes from 9 whole number to 0. So that is not least to greatest, right? This goes 145, 145, 145. So we're good so far. Now let's go to the tenths. 3, 3, 3. We're good. Now let's go to the hundredths. 3. Remember, just because it's not there, this is actually a 0. That's where they're trying to trick you, right? So a 3 to a 0 to a 4 is not least to greatest. So B would definitely be your answer. All right, let's take a look at number 10. Pause me right now and go through and figure out number 10. Put your signs in. Okay, let's look at this. You're going to use your inequalities, your greater than or less than or equal to determine, to make these equations correct, right? Or these formulas. So 4 and 5/10. Well, this is 4 and 5/10. So that's a 4 as a whole number, and this is a 0. So the 4 is much bigger, right? You've got to learn these words, and this just turns into simple stuff, right? This is 9. This is 9. They put this 0 in here just to try to trick you, but there's a 0 here and a 0. You know, all the numbers fill in, right? You don't have to worry about that. The 9 and the 9, right next to the decimal in your ones place is a 9, so that's fine. Then we've got 3/10 and 2/10. So 3 is bigger than 2, so that would be the greater than would go to the left. This one has 0.6 in the tenths. Well, this has a 6 in the hundredths. So here's your decimal, tens, hundreds, thousands. This 6 would go in the hundreds, which would leave a place value here. So if we look at this, 0.6 is bigger than 0.06, right? You have to know that when you see 1/100th, it goes to this place in this chart. That's why I think writing the decimal, tens, hundreds, thousands, it's almost impossible to get confused, right? So this one is 0.038 and 38 hundredths. So I'm going to do it again, tens, hundreds, thousands. So remember, the 8 has to go in the hundredths place. So here's the then the 3 has to go right before it, just like normal. And then there's my decimal somewhere in there. So 0.038 and 0.38, it would go the other direction. 0.038 or 38 thousandths would be less than 38 hundredths, right? Remember, that last big number that's in there is how you say it. All right. Number 11, use the decimal 94.532 to solve parts A and B. So it wants us to write this in expanded form. I wrote an example on our quiz, but if you're going to write this in expanded form, you're just expanding it out, multiplying it by the place values, right? So remember, our place values are ones, tens, hundreds. Decimal means and, tenths, hundredths, thousands. So I'm going to start at the beginning. Hundredths. In 94, there are no hundreds, right? So now I'm going to go to tenths. This is a 90. So I would do something like 9 times 10. That equals the 90 there, right? Then you would add. Now I need to go to the ones place. That's this 4. I would do something like 4 times 1 for the ones place. And then I would add it together. Then my and. Now I'm at the 5, and that's in the tenths place. So I would go 5 times 1/10. And that would be the 5 that would be going right here, right? Now I've got a 3 in the hundredths place, plus 3 times 1/100th. And then I would add in my 2 that is in the thousandths place. So it would be 2 times 1,000th. And that would be expanding it out, right? If you memorize this and use this to help you, it's almost kind of hard to mess it up, right? So now the last part is to write it in word form. Now that, remember, you got to say and. So you would write 94 and we have to write out 532. And remember, the 2 is in the thousandths place. So we would say it like that. 532 thousandths. So you just have to focus on this last number that shows up there, okay? And we'll talk more about this. We didn't talk a lot about expanding it before we did this. We just wanted to see what you guys knew. And then for number 12, this is that rule that we were talking about before, where if you, whether you divide by 100 or multiply by a fraction, you're still really kind of dividing, right? Because think about it. If you were going to divide this, it would be 100. Whoops, hold on, I'm doing that backwards. You would basically be dividing the 100 into 56.7. Now, if you wanted to do the same thing with this problem, look what would happen. You would have to turn this into a fraction, and it would be 56.7 over 1 times 1/100th. And then if you multiplied this out, you would get 56.7 over 100, just multiplying it straight across, right? Because we don't need a common denominator. But then remember, this fraction then turns into 100 going into, this would then turn into 100 going into 56.7, right? So when you get the answer to both of these, is basically going to be moving to the left 2 spots. So I kind of told you, you guys would just take this and you would, we kind of started this at the end of the week. This is probably still going to be confusing to you. But when you do when you divide or multiply by a fraction, the number's always getting smaller, right? So if we have 56.7, we need this to get smaller by 2 place value spots, the zeros, right? So this would go 1, 2. So your answer for both of these would turn into 0.567, or you would say it 567 thousandths. Okay? So then on this last part, it was a true and false question on your test. And it said, explain what happens to a decimal when you divide by 100 and multiply by 1/100th. You guys just have to know you get the same answer. So that was a trick question. Not really a trick if you understood, but it was a little tricky, I should say, right? So everybody use this video to practice these problems. This is the first half of what we need to know for our next monthly math test. We're going to start on the next half, which is adding and subtracting these decimals on Monday. So it's important that you guys practice using this video this weekend and trying to understand. You've really got to understand this formula and understand how this all works, right? This is less math, like math problems, solving math problems, and more knowing the formulas. It's almost like a big game, right? You've just got to know the rules. All right, guys, have a great weekend, and we will talk to you later.